Hello and welcome to the You've Got This Girl podcast, a space for celebrating all that we are as women, our struggles, our journeys, and our victories, sharing knowledge and inspiring stories of women accomplishing incredible things. I'm your host, Marilyn Brown, and my guest today is Lisa Condon. Lisa is a lover of life, adventurer of spirit, and cultivator of collaboration. As a business coach and life strategist, she thrives on helping businesses find their heart and people discover their passion through value and gratitude-based conversations. Lisa is an award-winning international speaker and author. She is professionally trained as a Six Sigma Black Belt and Scrum Master and integrates tried and true processes into all the work she does. Diving into life head first, you can find Lisa with her husband Nate traveling the world or sitting by a fire watching the stars. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, Marilyn. I'm super happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So I've worked with you personally in the past, and I know that in your work as an executive coach, you help women and others navigate the corporate world. Can you touch on the importance of learning to advocate for yourself in a professional setting?
Oh my goodness, absolutely. When you think about corporate world in general and the historical notion of corporations, they were mostly masculine societies, right? And building on that. And not that it's men, but more of the masculine, non-feeling, just focus on the task at hand and get it done. And what I found over the years is we as women in particular, as we step forward and become vulnerable in the conversations we have, it's it's important to advocate for yourself because nobody else is going to do it. And that I think that even starts with negotiating or even applying for a job. One of the things that I've seen time and time again, and I know you and I have talked about this prior just in side conversations where if somebody puts out a job description or a corporation does, and if you look at that, men, if they have even only 50% of the skill set, they're more likely to apply for it. Women, on the other hand, even if they have 75% of the capabilities and skills that the corporation is looking for, they still will not apply because they
Mm.
don't feel like they've got enough of whatever it is that they're looking for. And so, part of the work that I've done throughout the years is apply and see how the conversation goes because oftentimes a job description is just that. It's the concept of what they're
Mhm.
looking for, and then also the negotiation piece with salary.
Yeah.
Many people do not step forward and negotiate salary. They'll just take what's given to them, and usually an offer is a starting place.
Yeah, and so that really speaks to me. I had a one of my best friends through college who's actually on my volleyball team. Her name's Bree. She served as a mentor for me in a lot of ways coming into the working world. She was a couple years older than me, and that was her message was just throw your hat in the ring. If you see a job that you think you might be qualified for or have some of the qualifications for, worst comes to worst, they say no. But she always told me like that profile they put on there is the ideal candidate is this unicorn that they had all of these things, but is worst thing that happens is they say no. And you could impress them in other ways, whether it's your soft skills or things like that. Like maybe technically you're not the perfect candidate, but they can teach you the technical things, but they can't teach you how to be a human being and
Mhm.
how to interact with people with grace and with character.
I totally agree with that. And even if they say no, I always believe that there's that extra step of asking for feedback. And more people are open to giving that feedback. And it could be sometimes it is about the technical skills. That's real, and because maybe they need somebody to hit the ground running due to an unexpected leave, if they're replacing somebody. But to your point, also, fit and feel is incredibly important. And if there's somebody that has some of the criteria you're looking for just from a skill set, but the makeup of the person, their energy, the way they communicate, all of those soft skills that you're talking about really fit with the culture, they'll end up getting the job over somebody that has the technical skills but doesn't have that same fit all day long because companies really are looking for that. I would say employee experience these days. It's incredibly important, and part of that employee experience is team and having people that live and breathe the same value system, but also just can work together cohesively.
Yeah, I think that it speaks a lot to a company's culture when they really focus on making sure that the employees that they hire are a fit. And to your point of kind of the way that women in particular self-select out of these processes sometimes, I mean, I almost did that. I was looking potentially to make a job move at the time. I was 8 months pregnant. And so I assumed I was just going to have to wait until after I had my baby. But then the company I worked for right now, the Knot, they reached out to me for a position, and I interviewed for the position, had the technical interview, and I pretty much tanked that interview. It was good to have that interview because I appreciate that they tested my technical acumen there, because I would have been in over my head if I had taken that job just based on my resume. And so I figured, that's the end of the road with them. But then the recruiter actually reached back out to me, and, this was August, and they said, look, we have this position that we think would be great for you, but it doesn't start until December. So I figured she was going to say, oh, well, come back to us in December after you're done with your maternity leave. She said, no, we want to lock you down as a candidate now. So we want to hire you now, understanding that you're going to go out on maternity leave in September. Like, wait a minute. So you're saying that you're going to hire me now in August, knowing I'm leaving in a month, and then give me 3 months paid maternity leave? And they're like, yeah. I'm
That's
like, where's the
amazing.
catch? And it was so, to this day, I'm still really loyal to the company because they did that for me. They had the awareness to see past that initial, like, yes, I'm going to be out for 3 months, but realize that I was the right employee for the job and give me an opportunity. I thought that was really cool that they did that.
I love that. And I think there's a couple of things with that as you were telling that story. Number one, obviously you mentioned you're going to be loyal to this company because of how that relationship started off, and they valued you. They looked beyond some of like the misnomers that are out there, and including around pregnancy. Well, we don't know if they're going to come back. They're on maternity leave, they might not come back. That doesn't matter. They hired you based on your skill set and who you are. So I applaud that deeply. But what it also shows, so your loyalty is there, it also shows the culture of the company in such a deep and meaningful way of what their leadership values there. And that's huge. That's huge. And to me, as somebody that actually teaches values, I work with corporations all the time that have never done the work around values. They will state it, but maybe in their mission statement, or even they might go to a vision or even list what their values are. However, they do not live it, breathe it, and integrate it. So they're not putting it in their job descriptions. They're not putting it into goals. They're not actually doing the same or doing the actions around the values. They're just kind of stating it. This
Yeah.
company is obviously living and breathing it. So that's
Yep.
awesome. I love
Yeah,
hearing that.
they really walk the walk. And for me as a prospective employee, it was such a power move. It was like, I have
Sure.
no question coming into this space of this company respects families, respects women.
Hmm.
I mean, that's an immediate and strong statement that both of those things are true, and that's important to me in the phase of life that I'm in. So, costs them, $0 in the long term, but it was just such a poignant way to kind of tell me in that moment who they are as a company, and that I would be able to belong there as a woman and as a mother, for
I love it.
for longevity for my career. I thought it was so cool.
Yeah. How long have you been there now? I'm curious.
Coming up on 5 years, because I
Yeah,
joined in 2020 when Dean was
I
born,
love
so coming
that.
up on 5 years.
Yeah, and in a time too where people do job hop, right?
Mhm.
And 5 years is a long time. Yeah, historically, people stayed at jobs for a myriad of reasons, usually had more to do with climbing the ladder, right? All of the old adages there, along with pensions that were offered and retirement packages and all of that. And those things are long gone. They rarely exist these days. And so people are job hopping for various reasons. So 5 years is actually a really nice amount of time that somebody is with an
Yeah.
organization. So that's like fantastic.
Yeah. No, I'm definitely enjoying the ride there. So, can you touch a little bit on the value that you think that a woman's intuition brings to the workspace? We had a couple conversations about this.
Yeah, and it's funny. I used to not talk about this because going back to I grew up professionally in a very not only masculine industry, but male dominated industry. I grew up professionally in the newspaper industry. And you didn't really talk about the intuition because it was associated with being too fluffy, too touchy-feely, add in whatever adjective you want that had a negative connotation around it. So you just kind of shoved it down. And as I built my business and started thinking about all of the things that I was doing, I would talk about the what to do and how to do it, but I rarely talked about the why. And I think the why is really where that intuition piece comes in, because that's when you start talking about purpose and heart-centered work. And when you are truly coming at your work from a place of creating change,
Mm,
purposeful work, heart work, in everything that you do, profit is going to come from that. It's
mm,
going to hit your bottom line because you're having impact. Impact, I think, is something that we all desire as human beings. And women, as we get older, we are you typically, and I'm generalizing here, but typically we have to be so many things to so many other people that we forget about the impact we want to make. And so when we start talking about it, we're usually a little bit older, 30s, 40s, and all of a sudden we're like, wow, what's my purpose and what am I doing and bringing to that work? And that's when you start to dig deep and when your head and heart are very aligned with the work that you're doing. And that's when that spark really ignites and you're just like on fire.
mm.
And it's not about having the A plus perfection personality. It's about doing the work and innovating and really being intentional about every single move you make in the workplace. And usually, what I see is those people who are really connected like that within themselves, they end up being the leaders, whether or not they're in a leadership position, they end up being the leaders because everybody else can feel that energy and see the work product that's produced at the
Yeah.
end. It's very powerful, and I think it is not talked about enough.
Yeah. Well, and I think that these, historically necessarily these emotions or these concepts of empathy and vulnerability were sort of shunned in the workplace. But now in today's society, especially with eyes on corporations and companies, it's that, you're expected to be a corporate citizen
Mm.
as a company more so these days, and that empathy is expected. And there is a direct feedback, I feel like, when companies aren't good corporate citizens. And so there's a superpower, I think, in having that perspective in the room, that empathetic perspective, that perspective that thinks about, well, besides the bottom line, how is this going to affect people? How? So it's, I think, a shift and a good one,
Mhm.
that makes companies more responsive to the greater good of society.
I agree. And I'll give you an example, actually. There's a company that I've done a lot of work for many, many years. And there was a big decision to make. They had basically signed a contract with a very large partner, and they changed a lot of roles and responsibilities that people were doing. And there was one particular role where they could have kept it, or they could have let it go and kind of shifted it and given it to the partner. And there were pros and cons for doing either, and went through the normal channels of roles, responsibilities, profit, yada yada. At the end of the day, what made the final decision was when they overlaid what the employee experience was on top of it. And the employee experience was actually really, really bad
Mm,
because of the frustration that started playing out in all of this. And it wasn't until that conversation where it became crystal clear what needed to happen. And so that care that they had for their employees was a really big deal. And I don't know that I would have seen that 10 years ago. I don't think that conversation would have ever happened. And I think they would have made the wrong decision had that conversation not taken place. So it is incredibly important. And I think it falls under that lens of experience and, the even under the DEI work, really and truly, people DEI is such a broad spectrum. It's not just about optics, it's so many other things, including the inclusiveness of ideas and conversation and being able to bring to the table this this essence of feelings and experience and um, how it's going to affect people's lives and making
yeah.
whatever decision you're making for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point because, the way I guess I see DEI in a lot of ways is like, your whoever your customers are, your customer base, they're going to be a diverse set of people. So
Yep.
I consider it to be kind of a superpower to be able to have people in the room who can represent the various viewpoints that you're trying to serve in a lot of ways.
Oh, 100%. I mean, think about it. Just in normal life, we all approach our decision making based on the experiences and the lens from which we live, right? We all do. And so you and I could have had similar experiences from the time we grew up until now, but because of one maybe small thing, the way that either we approach something or even a decision we come to might be different because of that one small thing. So I agree with you. I think it is all about that the representation at the table, having the right conversations, and it's why we don't do anything in a vacuum or shouldn't do things
Mm,
in a vacuum because
yeah.
it's only going to touch a very small subset of individuals. Whereas if you have that collective, just imagine what you can do with all of that brain power and what
Mm,
you can innovate and how you can make and cultivate and create change. Like that's
mm.
where it gets exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you touched on the employee experience. And in our discussions, you've mentioned the importance of, at first we talked about work-life balance, but you mentioned that work-life boundaries
Mhm.
is where you like to focus and evaluating our values as employees and people. Can you touch on that a bit?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think work-life balance has been talked about so long and for so many years. And I started realizing just through my conversations that, especially for those of us that are perfectionists or recovering perfectionists, that set us up to fail because when you think about balance, that means 50-50. The scale needs to be balanced. When in reality, that's unrealistic. It's unrealistic for people's lives. And so we all have a life journey. And sometimes in that journey, you need to spend more time at work. And sometimes you need to spend more time at home. And sometimes you need to spend more time in your community because of circumstances, whatever they might be. And so I started thinking about there's this whole conversation that's been happening and bubbling up over the years around boundaries. Well, boundaries are truly, it started off by having boundaries with other people. What you say, what you do, how you let them in, how you don't. I overlay that on work because if you think about boundaries, they can constrict and they can expand. And so if I know that let's say this week, for example, I have a lot of clients that are going through a lot of different things. Well, I might spend a little more time in my workspace and in my work head to assist them because I know there's a lot of change going on. So my boundary might be expanded a little bit. Whereas, on the flip side of it, my mother-in-law is here this week. And so I'd like to spend time with her. And so, thank goodness I have the opportunity to actually constrict my boundaries this week so I can spend more time with her. But those are the things that you really need to think about. It is about experience. And so, I think about you when you were out on maternity leave and you came back. There's no way that you're going to be able to come back 100% day one because that's not where your heart and mind is. Your heart and mind is with this child that you just had. And so your boundary might be a little bit different and shifted at that time just because of the season of the life that you're in. Same thing could happen if you're a caretaker of a parent, right? And so if your parent needs your assistance or your spouse or whomever,
Mm,
then that becomes where you're going to spend a little more time. So,
yeah.
um, and that tends to really resonate with employers when you start talking about it that way versus the work-life balance, because every
Yeah.
employer thinks they provide flexibility for work-life balance.
Yeah, and I think that there's also been a generational shift with current generations who are entering the workforce, that the values have shifted towards valuing more the respect for us as total humans and respect for those boundaries versus
Mhm.
salary entitlement. Obviously, salary plays into it to a degree, of course, but like for me, around the whole conversation around return to office, I work for a remote first company, and it would take a lot of convincing, even if additional money were involved, for me to consider going back to an in-office full-time
Mhm.
job. I have two small kids, and I value that time that I have with them in the morning to be able to get them ready and get them to school without having to rush us around. That matters to me more than, a bit of additional money, or, obviously there's a would be a tipping point, I'm sure, at some point, but or a title, but just the fact that my company sees me as a full human being and understands and respects those boundaries that I've set is so important. And I think that the companies who understand that are experiencing a competitive advantage in the talent space versus companies who are still trying to rail against it and enforce the status quo and the legacy way of doing things.
I agree. I agree. And I also think there's a difference between what you value and your core values too, because I feel as though when you know what your core values are, you can't work for a company there where there's not alignment. I'm not saying they have to match exactly, but there has to be alignment there. Um, and if there's not, you will leave. And you just inherently know when that's happening. I've had it happen myself, and you just feel it in your gut. You just know that it's wrong. But also looking at what it is that you value in that moment of time. What I would value now with an employer would be so different than what I valued 25 years ago, 30 years ago. And I highly recommend writing yourself a list and then looking at it, every year, and just to kind of see, do I value the same thing? Because flexibility is usually a big deal. PTO, and not just the time off that's paid, but how they do it. Do you have a sick time bucket and a vacation bucket, or is it all in one bucket? Those things do matter. Like you said, remote work is really a big thing that I see a lot of right now. Do they have a hybrid way of working? Are you completely remote? Some people don't even want to be completely remote because they like the structure of being in the office. Ask yourself and be really intentional about what it is that you like. If you want a title, there's not a darn thing wrong with that. Then you've got to prioritize that, So it's really understanding where you're at in your season of life and understanding what you value in those moments and then prioritizing those because you
Yeah.
can't have everything be the priority. So you've got
Yeah.
to start somewhere.
The Venn diagram that really resonates with me because I've been climbing the ladder in a lot of ways and making a lot of job moves. I had a job that had me traveling overseas, which was so cool when I worked in the aerospace industry. But yeah, to your point, now I've come into a season of life where stability is really important to me. The
Mhm.
work from home is really important to me. And so for right now, like I'm still leveling up skill wise. I'm still, contributing in a meaningful way as an employee, but I'm not thinking in this mode of like, what's the next step? What's the next
Right.
climb? I'm sort of in a holding pattern, maintaining my skills until maybe my kids are a little bit older and I think about that next career move. But it's having those honest conversations with yourself about where am I in this journey and
Mhm.
what do I want and how has that changed, to your point.
100%. It's as you were talking, I got this image of a tree. And oftentimes when I talk about the tree, it's not only does a tree kind of grow up, it also has roots down, right, where you're expanding in both directions. But there's also the leafing out. And so, as you're blossoming, so even like training and education and all of that, like what does your employee do around that? Because maybe it's about staying right where you are and you're just kind of expanding outward a little bit just so you can put more arsenal in your toolkit, right? And
Mm,
just learning and filling your cup that way.
yeah.
I just think there's so many different opportunities and none of them are wrong. Whatever you choose and that moment's going to be the right thing
Hmm.
for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned the roots. And for me, one of the roots that's been so important, I think, is my husband, Nick. He has been such a fantastic support person in some of these transitions because I fully admit that I suffer from imposter syndrome. And when I've been going to make some of these career moves, sometimes I'll doubt myself. Either I'll think, to your point from earlier, maybe I won't put myself out there for a particular job because I don't think I'm quite ready for it. And there was one particular time where I was leaving a job where the work-life boundaries were not being respected. And I had come back from my first vacation from taking the job, and it just felt like a ton of bricks fell on my head because nobody had been taking care of anything while I was gone. I was doing the job of maybe one and a half, almost two people. And I remember calling Nick and being like, I don't think I can do this anymore. And he sort of calmed me in that moment and said, hey, you're already putting resumes out there. You have the skills. If you need to leave this job to focus on your job search, do it. We have savings. It's going to be fine. And not that I needed permission, but just getting that outside perspective to say, you're not crazy. You're on the right path here. Do what you need to do. was so important for me. And so I was wondering if you could discuss a little bit what your thoughts are on the importance of having support people during our professional journeys.
Oh, so I call it the personal board of directors. And I think it's incredibly important because every organization has a board of directors. Why would we as individuals not have that? And so I think it is filled with people like, your doctor, your attorney, your therapist, if you have one, all of those professions. But then you also need the individuals from a support perspective, the person that's going to tell it like it is. That person where, hey, you shouldn't be wearing that dress, right? Or in a work perspective, like you are in the wrong job because it is not bringing out the best in you. I think you also need that trusted individual that no matter what, when you go to them, you can show your most vulnerable parts to them. They're still going to love you and they're going to support whatever decision it is that you make. And they're going to do it in this gentle, loving way. I think what's so beautiful about your story about Nick, because it happens to be your husband, and
Mhm.
that's a really special thing when you have a partner in life that really sees your value, not just as their spouse or their partner, but also sees the value that you bring to a workplace and they see that professional side of you. And they know that they can tell you to be fearless because they believe in you and it's not just because they love you. That's really special. And I think you need somebody like that in your personal board of directors also. So, and yeah, and I there's a whole other list of that, but I think it's incredibly important. I have my go-to people when I am questioning a decision that I made. There is one person, like I've known her a really long time, and I'm going to call her and I'm going to say, I just need your opinion. What would you have done in this situation? And the way that we approach it with each other now is I don't tell her what I did. I ask her, how would you have approached it?
Yeah.
And then I'd say, well, this is what I did, and we'll talk through that. And
Mhm.
what I love about that is there's always learning opportunities there, because again,
Mhm.
it goes back to we all do things differently. So, so I just think having those people and surrounding yourself with those people is so, so important
Yeah.
because one person can't be everything to you.
Right.
Hmm.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting too because I feel like even in different phases of life, those people can like you can have different people that come into your life and play that role for you, which is kind of cool. Like even starting this podcast, it was interesting because I got into a state of I was asking a bunch of people their opinions on it, and I was sort of kind of going back and forth and how can I prepare and sort of preparing at a certain point turned into stalling. And like luckily I had some really close friends that were just kind of like, is this something you believe in? Yes, do it. Like
Hmm.
you can prepare and prepare until the cows come home, but at a certain point, you just got to get out of the theoretical space and do. And
Hmm.
so, and it may not be perfect, and you're going to stumble, and there's going to be issues. This is so out of my comfort zone that
Yeah.
it really took some strength to sort of take that first step and just jump in and be like, all right, we're doing it. Let's do it.
Well, and so I'm so glad you did. And it's funny, I was actually telling somebody earlier today that you and I were going to be having this
Mhm.
conversation later. And she asked me what made because there's a lot of podcasts out there and she said, "Well,
Mhm.
what makes this one different?" And I said, "I got to be honest." I said, "I think it's about the being authentic, but being vulnerably authentic." And I have so much respect for people who can show up, do the things knowing that they're stepping into a space that they maybe not have encountered before, but because they know that they have something to say and that what they have to say is going to resonate and be important somewhere to someone along the line, and that's what's behind it. That's huge, and that's exactly what you're doing. I've watched your podcast, I've listened to the conversations, and they're different and they're important, especially now in our world. They're so, so important.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope with this whole project was to we as women are so diverse in the ways that we choose to live our lives and what our backgrounds are, but there are these through lines that come through and these commonalities that when we have conversations come up. And I get so excited when I have conversations with these women like after we cut the recording and we talk, and it's like maybe no one has asked them about their story before. A lot of these women, they're of service to others, and so they're not generally in the spotlight. So when the camera gets turned on them, I mean, they have phenomenal stories to tell, but no one's ever really asked them. And
Hmm.
so I get so much joy out of being able to do their stories justice and give them a platform to be able to share the incredible things that they're doing. And like my hope is that my daughter will someday watch these and be like, wow, look at all the things that I can be if I want to. I can be anything I want to be. And I have all of these amazing role models who have come up against these different situations in life and different backgrounds, and they're just rock stars. And I love having these conversations. And so that for me, that's the most, I mean, people may watch it, people may not, and that's fine. But like, I just am so enjoying having these conversations with these women and giving them that platform. And I'm humbled and honored that the women who have talked to me so far have trusted me to be able to convey their stories.
I love that. And I love the notion about your daughter. My mom and my dad always, from the time I was very, very little, I remember them saying, you can do whatever it is you want to do.
Mm,
And I was born in 74. So that was not necessarily being talked about in every single household. But I can tell you that that was definitely a a launch pad for me because at 17 I left and never went back. And it's because
mm,
I went to explore the world and do all the things that I wanted to do because I believed that I could. It was
mm.
bumpy. I mean, I made a lot of missteps along the way, and I there was stuff that happened through my childhood. I mean, we all have our stories, right? That impact the work that we do now. And what I do today is going to impact the work that I do tomorrow and next month, as it should, because that's how we continue to progress. But I also love the fact, like, I mean, your daughter's gonna have all these aunties out there that she can look to and have inspiration from. And her mom is gonna be at the center of all of that because you had the ability to introduce her to all of that. And I think that's absolutely beautiful. I love it.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know where this project's going to take me, but so far, like I said, I've just been so honored to be a
Yeah.
part of it and be able to have the conversations. And it's like, it's so cool because you don't think about necessarily, especially in today's world, how divisive it can be. Like it's sometimes I feel like it's hard to come back to the core of what we have in common because lines get drawn, right? It's like it's easier to point out those differences rather than, it takes, I think, conversation and deep thought to think about the lines that exist between us and the common experiences that we have regardless of what our backgrounds are.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, completely agree. I moved to Nashville about 6 months ago, and
Mhm.
the only person that we knew here, my husband and I, was our friend who lived in Vermont, and Nate's known him forever. I mean, they were
Mm,
roommates for 10 years. That's it. So I'm in this space of meeting all of these new people, and it does go back to commonality. And if I don't find something in common with somebody in the first 5 minutes, then I'm not going to say it's not worth my time. However, I would much rather spend the time being able to have a conversation. And
mhm,
I don't care about the weather, although we've had tornadoes here, but I don't care typically about the weather. I want to go deep fast. And
yes.
because we have a finite amount of time in this earth and on this earth and
Mhm.
in this space, that let let's connect and let's like
Yeah.
create change and meaningful
Mhm.
conversation. That's where the
Yeah.
magic is, for
Yeah.
sure. Hmm.
Yeah, it's so funny that you say that because I'm not, I think we might have had this conversation before about introverts versus extroverts, right? It's
Hmm.
like there's this common misconception about introverts not being able to be social. It's like, no, introverts can be social, but it's about where you get your energy. Introverts get their energy from being alone, extroverts get their energy from being around people. I'm a very social introvert. And
Hmm.
so when I go to big parties or things like that, it's very draining for me after a certain point. And my face just, it's so funny because Nick can tell when I want to go home sometimes because it's like I tell him my face is just tired of making emotions. I just go like blank. It's not that I'm mad, but I'm just blank. And
Hmm.
but one of my coping mechanisms, which kind of led me down this path of this podcast, one of my coping mechanisms is to have conversations just like what you were talking about. I lock in with one person for an hour and a half and I'm like, we're going into everything. I want to know everything about you from the day you were born to today and everything in between. Like, let's get deep. And those are the conversations that I enjoy. And that's how I get through some of those events when I otherwise would probably be a little bit uncomfortable just having the same discussion about pleasantries about the weather with 50 different people. It's like, no, I found you. What's your story? Let's lock in. Let's do this.
Hmm. Oh, yes. And it's funny. So, what you're also describing, I hear the terminology ambivert a lot these days, where, the kind of that combination. I'm an extrovert, like hands down an extrovert. However, I am also an intuitive. And so, because of that, that's why I love to go deep. And I'm not going to do that with everybody. I'm going to feel out the energy
Mm,
and then that's going to happen. But I get my energy from being in the room and among a lot of
mm.
people. But I don't have to talk to them all. Like that I don't
Yeah.
need to do. I'm okay with not doing that.
Yeah.
And actually that happened with you and I. Yeah, I
Mhm.
remember very specifically at an event that we were at, and you and I ended up being in a corner near a pool table, and we talked for probably a good
Mhm.
hour, hour and a half,
Yeah.
just digging in. And that really
Yeah.
just kind of launched our relationship.
Well, and we discovered that we have the same favorite chocolate shop in downtown Paris.
Yes,
So,
yes, we do.
um,
That's so funny.
just
Oh
so
my gosh, I
random.
can't believe you remember that. That's so
Yeah.
fantastic.
You know what's funny is like I talk to Nick about this all the time. I'm like between song lyrics, which is useless, and like little bits and pieces and artifacts of like conversations. I'm like, man, I remember so many things that have no utility to me on a daily basis. Like if I could just push out half of the song lyrics and bring in, particle physics, then I would be a genius. But I can't work that. I can't control what my brain chooses to remember. Because he's like, how do you remember the lyrics of the song? Or I'm one of those people where I remember the names of people I went to like first grade with.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes in public, what I'll do is if someone comes up and says, "Oh, hey, I think I remember you," like I'll kind of pretend that I don't remember their name because I don't want them to feel bad, even though I know their name. Because I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm Marilyn. Oh, what was your name?" Because I feel like I'm gonna make them feel bad if they don't remember my name and I remember theirs, or they might think it's weird that I remember their name from like first grade.
Oh, Marilyn, I'm actually gonna flip that on you because I actually think because I have a memory like that as well,
Mm.
and people love it when they're remembered. People actually they
Oh,
do because as humans, we do have ego. We have id, ego,
mhm.
and all of that within us. People love that somewhere along the line they made an impact enough that you remember who they are.
That is okay. All right. So from now on, I'm gonna say their name. My first job out of college was for Dale Carnegie training, and he talks about how like the most beautiful sound to a person is their name.
Mm.
So I should know that more than anybody. That was my nascent job out of college. Wow.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I
Well,
love it.
I really appreciate your time today, and I loved this conversation as I love all of our conversations.
Oh, Marilyn, I just love talking with you. And yeah, again, anytime. Like, I just love having our conversations. I'm glad we could record one so that
Yeah.
way other people can, hear how our minds work. But,
Yeah.
I look forward to the next one for sure.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in, and we will see you next week.